I've been driving the GWM Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid ute for about a week now, and to wrap up that experience and encapsulate it into something worthwhile for you, I thought I would do the top 10 things that I love about this revolutionary new plug-in hybrid ute. But relax, dude. Lest you think this is some kind of paid-for suck piece, I assure you it is not, because at exactly the same time I'm releasing this video, the counterpoint to this video will also be published, which is the top 10 things I hate about this car. Because no car is perfect. I've been doing this for a living for 35 years and there isn't a single car I've driven that didn't have 10 things that I hated about it. The challenge for you, of course, is to figure out if you really, really love the things that you love about this car and you can tolerate the things that you hate. This, of course, is a ticket on the express to new car satisfaction city. But, you know, if you don't love these things enough, or if you can't tolerate the things in the deficiency column, then it's time to move on and look for something else. Anyway, let's go with the top 10. Number one, with a bullet, has to be the price. And I don't mean, hey dude, it's cheap. I mean, it's astonishingly good value. And I'll be the first to admit that the price of utes has gone functionally insane since COVID. Like just when the stock shortages kicked off in whatever it was, the early 2020s, I bought a top spec Triton, which is the previous generation now, for under 50 grand. And I did that because it was good value compared to a top spec Ranger or Hilux, for example, and I just wanted a ute to move stuff around. I didn't want it as some kind of status symbol, but the Triton's been okay. It's been super reliable and I kind of enjoy it because it does what it does, you know? However, given the current pricing explosion where you can pay almost $100,000 for a Ranger and you can comfortably get into the 80s with, you know, high spec but not top spec Rangers and Hiluxes, this thing is astonishingly good value. Like the entry spec, which is hardly poverty, it's quite well equipped, is early 60s drive away, and the top spec, which has more than any sane person needs, is like late 60s. You'll get it under 70 drive away, paying the full freight everywhere except WA, because you guys get ripped off in WA. And when you consider what you get for that spend, early 60s or late 60s to early 70s in WA, this vehicle just is ridiculously good value, and it is very hard on fundamentals to make a case for top spec Ranger or Hilux compared to top spec GWM plug-in hybrid. This report is sponsored by NordVPN. Get a mega discount plus 4 extra months of Nord for free now in my exclusive deal. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC. Online security threats are everywhere, but you don't have to be the next victim. That's where NordVPN comes in, locking everything down securely in the background. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now. Every 2-year NordVPN plan receives that mega discount with the 4 free months and a bonus Amazon gift card on the Plus and Complete Nord packages for a limited time only. nordvpn.com/AEJC. Using NordVPN is easy. Just subscribe, download the app and connect. 1 click later, your IP address is shielded and your traffic is encrypted across as many as 6 of your devices. Nord is the fastest VPN on the planet. It costs only about as much as a single cup of coffee every month to keep your data, your identity, and your devices secure. Masking your location means you'll be able to access content that might be blocked where you live. Plus, you can continue to watch your favourite content when you travel. Boost your online security at nordvpn.com/AEJC now. Get that mega discount, enjoy those extra 4 months, plus the free Amazon gift card with the Plus and Complete packages for a limited time. It's all totally risk-free with Nord's rock-solid 30-day money-back guarantee. It's easy to stay safe online. Visit nordvpn.com/AEJC now. You can't have a rational conversation about this car without talking about the preposterous powertrain performance. Like 300 kilowatts and 750 newton meters in a ute. This thing is not quite as quick as the entry-level Ram 1500 with about 300 kilowatts because it's carrying a bit more heft than that vehicle. It is a very heavy car, but those outputs give it staggering performance, frankly. It's got a 180 kilowatt turbo petrol 4 up the front, and then it's got an electric motor inside the transmission delivering 120 kilowatts, deriving its energy from a 37 and a bit kilowatt hour battery right up the blunt end where the spare tyre would be in a normal ute. When I say performance though, I'm not just really talking about accelerative performance. This thing has a multi-speed transmission, so it's philosophically different to say the Shark 6 or the Mitsubishi Outlander. They're kind of the same in terms of the way that plug-in hybrid powertrain operates, i.e. mostly electrical most of the time. You have to get up to 70 k's an hour sort of thing for those vehicles to engage the combustion engine directly with the wheels, like directly driven kind of thing. This thing has a multi-speed transmission, so it is mostly combustion driving the wheels most of the time, although it is capable of operating in EV mode. So that's kind of interesting and philosophically different. It also means you only need uno electric motor, and it is inside the proprietary 9-speed transmission. Because this thing has a transfer case, you only need one electric motor to get all-wheel drive, at times electric all-wheel drive, to all 4 wheels, which when you think about it is pretty clever, and doubtless it also uses the transmission fluid to keep the electric motor cool, which is kind of clever also. This means it is far more off-road oriented than vehicles like the Shark 6. You also get 3.5 ton towing and low range with diff locks and all of that kind of stuff. So when you think about the overall performance envelope of this car, it is really robust. The Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid is extremely impressive on off-road fundamentals, and that would be a salient point of difference between it and the BYD Shark 6. So I thought, rather than just rave on about that, let's climb under here and actually have a look at the bits that do the heavy lifting on and off-road. So we're looking towards the front of the vehicle now, okay? This is the rear transmission support crossmember. Here's your transfer case, multi-speed transmission here, rear drive shaft here, front drive shaft here, and all the front drive line below the engine on the other side of these cross members. So this is a really smart layout for people who actually want to do off-road adventuring because you've got multi-speed and low range. Obviously, with the transfer case here, what you're looking at there is a servo motor and a worm drive that does all the activation for the different modes. And that means you've got the centre diff unlocked in high range for driving on a high traction surface like taking the kids to school or something. Then you've got the centre diff locked in high range for driving at normal road speeds but on a soft surface. And then you've got low range also with the centre diff locked for situations where you need lots of torque multiplication like steep descent, and also situations where you need low travel speeds, right? So this is something that you can't easily manage with an electric-only drivetrain like a lot of other plug-in hybrids, including the BYD, right? And this means for off-road adventuring, it will be hard to beat this on fundamentals. It would be hard for this vehicle to be worse than the Shark 6 off-road. They'd have to really try because it's got so much intrinsic engineering advantage, right? So the multi-speed transmission just here on the other side of this crossmember has the electric motor in it. And just think about that for a second too, because the electric motor drives both ends, because transfer case, okay? The output out of the transmission can be electric only or combustion only or a combination of the two, and it just comes out of a shaft here. And as far as the transfer case is concerned, it's just drive. So instead of having an electric motor at the back and an electric motor at the front and needing control architecture so that those two drive systems talk to each other when you are doing any kind of driving in EV mode, you don't need any of that. There's a 120 kilowatt electric motor inside the transmission, cooled by the transmission fluid, and it provides whatever level of drive the programming tells it to provide, and then it goes front and rear as needed, which is pretty clever. So I think when you add all of these things up that I just talked about, including the previous 2 points, the price and the staggering powertrain performance, and all of this off-road fundamental stuff, you've got value and performance and off-road cred, and to me, that means you don't have to apologise to your mates for buying this vehicle, because you can just look at them and say, how much did you pay for your Hilux, and how many kilowatts and newton meters does it make? And let's have a crack up this hill and see if there really is any difference in off-road performance. You might disagree with me here, but I love the fact that they stood up for what Australian consumers really need at GWM in Australia and insisted on this half-assed spare mounting arrangement here. The half-assedness of the spare mounting will be in my hate video, because I do kind of hate it. But when the chips are down, you're in the middle of nowhere, holidaying with the fam, no mobile service, you've just gone up this hill because the car can do that, and a tree root has pierced itself fair through the frickin' sidewall, and you know that the tin of goop and the compressor that would otherwise have been installed in this car in lieu of a spare has no hope in hell of sealing a defect such as that. You'd be overjoyed to have this half-assed spare here. So I respect them for doing that. Obviously, the car maker would have preferred to just forget about the spare, because who really needs that anyway, kind of thing. But having it here when the chips are down is a real plus. And obviously, this is the nature of design compromises when they bite you on the buttocks, is it not? Because all of the space that could be devoted to fitting a spare is actually full of two big sandwiched together battery modules that give this vehicle A, its preposterous power, and B, its fairly impressive EV-only range. This is such a feature-rich and luxurious interior. I'd suggest if you've got a whole bunch of test subjects and blindfolded them and then just teleported them into the driver's seat without giving them any hint of the car externally and didn't let them look in the rear vision mirror and figure out that it was a ute, they would be saying premium SUV, is it European kind of thing, because that's how polished this is. After living with it for a while, I'd suggest there are a few anomalies, like the Lexus style analog clock in the center here seems to serve no purpose. In fact, it's the only analog instrument that I can find in the entire vehicle. So I think that's just there because Lexus does that and therefore it must be good, kind of thing. But the shifter feels like it could have come from a European car. All of the all-wheel drive kind of four-wheel drive components, the diff lock, the low range, and the mode button and all of that, it feels good, you know? It really feels premium. I'd suggest there's a little bit too much shiny piano black on the steering wheel, and at times that picks up the sun from back here and shines it at you, and maybe they could have gone 6 or 7, 8 millimeters bigger in diameter on the steering wheel, but that would be being a nitpicking asshole, which I'm really good at, you know. You've got to play to your strengths, right? But in general, this thing is packed with features. This means, of course, that the challenge for the designers is it's like Adam Savage, you know, his theory of first order retrievability. In your workshop, Adam Savage's theory, hypothesis, is that the tools that you use all the time need to be just here so that they're the first order of retrievability. And that's what this cabin generally delivers. The functions that you need all the time are just here. The transmission select is great, seat heating and seat ventilation, your four-wheel drive controls for low range and diff locks and things of that nature. Your drive mode button is just here. All of the stuff you need all the time is pretty accessible. It'd be nice to have temperature adjustment on the HVAC as a button. That's a bit of an oversight because at the moment you've got a deep dive into the menu system, which isn't a killer, but it's something that you need to do all the time. You know, people like the temperature up and down, and diving into the menu while you drive is not as easy as just pressing an up-down button here like every other car, frankly. But if you sat 100 people in this car and said, where is this car made? I'd be very surprised if even one of them said China. If you buy this vehicle, I'd strongly advise you to think about fitting a fast AC charger at home, because it does come with a brick, and the brick uses a standard power point at your home. It plugs in obviously here, and you plug the extension cord into the other end, and you're recharging at 2 and a bit kilowatts of power. So that's great, except if you've got a flat battery and you want to turn the vehicle around with a full battery, and you want to do that in a quote unquote reasonable time frame, because flat battery plus 37 kilowatt hours is going to take about 18 hours if you use the supplied charging cable and a standard GPO in your garage or something. If you fit a fast charger, and I've tried this with the fast charger at my joint, so this definitely works, it will recharge at about 6 and a bit kilowatts. It's up and down a bit depending on where it is in the charge cycle. But if we say an average of 6, that drops the turnaround time frame to about 6 hours, which means a couple of things. It's manageable because you can sleep on it, and it also means if you want to do that every day to get to the office on electrical power or something every day, Monday to Friday, you can utilise off-peak electricity. So A, it's doable, and B, it's going to be a lot cheaper than petrol. So that's good, I guess, except if you've got the best part of 70 grand to spend on a vehicle, do you really care how much the petrol costs? You'd have to be doing this for environmental reasons. In other words, I spend a lot of time criticising the crap implementation of technology in cars, but just for balance, I have to give full points for the reversing and surround camera system in this car. We're in reverse mode at the moment. Obviously, the guidelines and etc. really clear. It would be very hard to run over a child in a driveway in a car such as this if you're paying attention. And worryingly enough, that is the second most common cause of accidental death of children in our nation. So this kind of technology really will save lives, but not only that, it'll help you with precision parking as well as prevent panel damage and getting stuck or driving into a ditch or something off-road, because you can see exactly what's around you. And if I just change quickly from reverse to drive, you can see the alternative forward view also with the guidelines split like that. And here's a clever touch as well, because obviously the view of the car is just imposed on the view that the camera sees. You can turn it off, and then off-road you can see exactly what is around the car as you're moving forward. And I'd suggest that in this kind of environment it's very hard to make mistakes, but in another kind of environment where the view is not so clear, some gnarly off-road track or some driveway you're terribly unfamiliar with, whatever, parking in an unfamiliar spot, this could come in really handy and ultimately save you thousands of bucks. So this is the combination, obviously, of clever technology and a dirty big monitor that makes it abundantly clear what's going on. So full points to GWM for this particular system. I'm going to hate going back to a ute that lacks the bimodal tailgate. Now, this all hinges on how deftly you can prod the pua. A somewhat leisurely prod of the pua, and this button in the center here, invokes the usual tailgate action. So I'm seeing lunch break, the burger, the fries, heaping endless shit upon your mates for buying Rangers and Hiluxes for $15,000 or $20,000 more and approximately half the power. So that'll be fun. However, the real brilliance of this setup is accessed by a somewhat briefer prod of the Pua, whence the tailgate turns into a split fold barn door jigger. And this, of course, allows you to step up easily into the load space without having to climb the spare tyre or fit accessories or any of that stuff. Access the tie down points, get your load where you want it, pick something up from right up here against the bulkhead in the centre where nobody who's not a Harlem Globetrotter can reach it, and then you can also just get out easily without busting a gut or anything of that nature. Here's a perverse factoid about the tray, and I am flat out struggling with this in the lofty domain of good versus shit. I can't decide really. So we're going to have an each way bet on this. I'm just pointing it out because you want to know before you take delivery, before you pay your deposit, because it could be good or it could be bad, depending on you and how you want to manage loads in the back. Just to lay out what this is, there's a high point in the center, like the tray is not flat. The middle, I'm going to say about 750, 770 is substantially higher than out here on the edges, and the difference between the peaks here and the peaks over here is 25 millimetres or about an inch in the old money. And also the valleys in between the peaks here, they're about 45 apart, okay? Whereas the first valley over here where you drop into this, let's call it a trench, is about 75 wide kind of thing, so 3 inches in the old money. And the reason I'm having such a struggle with this is A, I've never seen this in a ute before, and B, it could really depend on you whether this is good or bad and how you want to use your load. So if you want to put boxes in here and have them sit upright like on a flat floor, that's going to be a bit disappointing, and you'd want to know before you pay your deposit, because you might have to fix something up. You know, you might have to put a plywood floor in here and pack the edges, which is not the end of the world, but it's just another thing that you would have to do before you are properly set up. However, if you have a load that is pretty heavy and it's not palletized, and it's in here for whatever reason, say you lift it down on a crane at one location, like a little gantry thingo, and then you bring it to another location where there's a forklift, I'd suggest that this is just right, like pretty Goldilocks, for getting the tines of a forklift under your non-palletized load. So that could be a bit of a plus. In either case, it's not a deal breaker, but it's just something to be aware of before you drive off into the sunset hoping for, you know, unbridled satisfaction. I wanted to make this last point just staring up into space at the battery, which is on the other side of this pressed steel plate. There's actually steel plate, foam, and then aluminium battery enclosure. You can just see the 400, I guess-ish volt connections over here. The whole thing is IPX, whatever, probably 67 or something. So you don't need to worry about immersion or anything of that nature, but the battery is heavy and it is slung right out the back, which most people would think is a terrible news story. You're looking at the tow bar here, right, and the rear differential housing just here. I think you can, yeah, definitely see that as well. So the battery takes up all of this space from here to here and from there to there, and it is a heavy thing. And most people would say, well, that's terrible, but I'd suggest that there's two things about that. Having it out the back does place a fair bit of cantilevered load on the chassis, but, you know, the engineers surely accounted for that in the design, and I'd have to say the chassis does look particularly well made and very beefy indeed. So if you know what the load is, obviously you can design the structure to cope with that. But if you are towing, I'd suggest that having the battery out here is a real advantage, just the same as having a big heavy engine and multi-speed transmission and an axle up the other end is a real advantage as well. And that's because two things, okay? This vehicle is intrinsically heavy. It's in the ballpark of 2.9 tonnes. So that's good for towing because it means it has a lot of inertial stability. When the trailer, if it's heavy, tries to nudge the vehicle out of the way, the inertia of the vehicle resists that and keeps the combination stable. And that is exactly what you want if you're towing some heavy thing. The other thing is the distribution of these masses, because inertial stability, we're thinking about the plane of yaw, which is the vehicle being nudged out of the way in the same manner of rotation as an old LP record or something. It's going to spin like it's going to yaw if the trailer nudges the rear end that way or that way, okay? And it's not just the mass that keeps these platforms stable, it's also the moment of inertia, in particular the polar moment of inertia. Obviously, if you concentrate all the mass right into the centre, into a little ball, like a little tiny piece of plutonium or something, instead of all of this distributed mass, then it's easier to spin that than it is when you've got the heavy things at the ends. You could try this with a milk crate, you know, you could put 4 eggs, 2 at each end, and then try spinning it around your finger in the middle, and then you could put the 4 eggs in the centre and then try spinning it, and it's much easier to spin it when the mass is concentrated in the centre of the thing, right? So what you've got here is the opposite of that. You've got a high moment of inertia thanks to this, I'm gonna say, 200 or 300 kilos of battery just hung out the back here, in concert with all the heavy shit up the front. So if you are going to tow conservatively, I guess up to about 3 tonnes, then there's no excuse for this not being among the most stable towing platforms that money can buy.